Shalom and welcome to all our viewers. And today we are hosting a good friend of mine whom I met for the first time about 3 decades ago, Mr. Bruce Brill. Welcome.
Thank you.
I think I recall who the mutual acquaintance was about 3 decades ago who introduced us for the first time. It had something to do with the infamously criminal so-called Oslo Peace Accords, as I recall. And we actually lost contact with each other for many, many years. But more recently, we have renewed our connection. And recently, you published a book, and I'm showing this book now to the camera. The name of the book is Deceit of an Ally, a memoir of military anti-Semitism, NSA's secret Jew room, and Yom Kippur war treachery. This came out when? When was this book published?
Several months ago.
Several months ago. So in the end of 2023, according to the Gregorian calendar. And I should state at the very outset, because this discussion is going to touch upon many security and intelligence related matters, that everything in this book and everything that's going to be discussed today has been cleared as amended for open publication by the Department of Defense of the United States, which includes all the intelligence community of the United States as well. And this was cleared for publication as amended in this book on the March the 23rd, 2021. You might be able to see it there, written
right.
black and white. Very well. And before we continue, perhaps you could inform our viewers, if they are interested, and I'm sure, having heard what you have to say, they will be very interested, how they might procure this book.
Okay, so it has an English version.
And I should have mentioned it's been translated into Hebrew. That's correct, yes.
And it also has a Hebrew version.
Yes, I forgot to mention that.
Right. And the English can be gotten through Amazon or Ingram Sparks. And I believe it's on several platforms, including Barnes and Nobles. And if you go to the Amazon site, the first one that comes up, you're liable to find that it's unavailable. At least that's what the message says. And it's a problem because of a first edition that had to be removed. So just be persistent and go down to other links, and you'll find a link that would allow you to purchase it.
All right. And is it possible to obtain it directly from you or from some other individual?
For sure.
And how can people contact you?
Okay, we set up a website on Facebook for the books, for both the English and the Hebrew.
And what is the address?
Well, I guess it would be under my name again.
Bruce Brill, Brill. And the name of the book again is Deceit of an Ally. And having completed that part of the discussion with the plug and my sincere recommendation, my hearty recommendation that people do read this book, as I am presently doing. I've read most of it already, and it's truly fascinating and illuminating. Let us begin from the beginning. So who are you, Mr. Bruce Brill?
Okay, so I think the beginning is the fact that you mentioned the title, Deceit of an Ally, and it sounds like it might be anti-American. And I know that I've had some trouble with organizations through whom I wanted to give talks and use them as venues, because they said, how can we allow you to give a talk on something that sounds anti-American? And it's anything but anti-American. What it is, if anything, it's anti-American, because I
Explain.
was a patriotic American. I still am. I have not renounced my American citizenship, even though I've lived now most of my life in Israel. I still feel proud to be an American. I don't see any contradiction in that. Another thing that I want to point out is that in the approval of the Pentagon, you see two dates. This book not only was approved by the Pentagon, it was approved twice, but it was reviewed and approved twice. It has, I believe, a unique distinction in that regard.
And why did this take place twice?
Okay, because when they approved it the first time, after 4-month review, where the Pentagon pre-publication office sent the manuscript out to all of the relevant U.S. intelligence agencies for them to give their approval and their requirement to redact anything that they felt needed to be redacted. I'll give you an example, perhaps, if I can find it, of some of the sections that needed to be redacted.
There are quite a few sections and entire paragraphs sometimes that have been redacted and blacked out.
Right, right. So throughout the book, there are redactions. And so that was one of their requirements, is that I eliminate what needs to be eliminated. And number two, that I don't add one word of new content. And subsequent to their approval, after their 4-month review, 3 items came up that I wanted to include in the book. One of them, perhaps the main one, was the release from the IDF archives, a protocol from October 7th, 1973. It was a protocol of Moshe Dayan in which he stated that 12 hours before Syria and Egypt began their coordinated attack against Israel, 12 hours, he had received an intelligence assessment from his American friends that the Arabs have no intention of attacking. And this totally confirmed what Eli Ze'ira, General Eli Ze'ira, who was then head of Amman, Israeli military intelligence, confided in me, that he received an American intelligence assessment prior to the outbreak of the Yom Kippur War, saying that the Arabs were not going to attack, totally confirming what Eli Ze'ira confided in me. So I wanted to include that and 2 other items. So I sent it back to the Pentagon, and they reviewed it once again. This time it wasn't 4 months, it was 2 months. So a total of a 6-month review. And I'll speak more at length about the other 2 items that I wanted to include in the book after their first approval.
Okay, so
later on.
Well, we'll get back to that. So let's, as I said, begin at the beginning. Who is Bruce Brill? Where do you come from? Where were you born? Where were you brought up? How do you come to know anything about these matters?
Okay, I make a couple of jokes about where I was born and raised. I say I was born in Lebanon. No, Lebanon Hospital in the Bronx.
Okay.
And I was raised out west, the West Bronx.
So you're a native of New York?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And so were my parents. Both my parents were born and raised in New York. Their parents, all four of my grandparents, were Orthodox Jews from Europe. My parents, however,
when did they arrive in the United States? Your grandparents?
the late 19th century.
Okay.
All of them in the 1890s.
Right. That was the time of the great massive wave of immigration, Jewish immigration from Eastern Europe.
Right. There were pogroms at that time, and many Jews left for safer havens.
Do you know where they came from in Eastern Europe?
Sure do. Sure do.
Tell us.
My mother's parents, both of them, were from Kiev gubernia. In other words, the outskirts of Kiev in Ukraine.
Ukraine.
My father's mother was from a small village, Hashova. The biggest nearby city would have been Munkach. And this was then in easternmost Hungary. But since World War II, where the borders moved westward, today it's in Western Ukraine.
Ukraine, yes.
And my father's father was from the Posen, or in Polish, they say Poznan province, of what was, at the time that he left, Posen, and it was part of Germany. And he was very proud to be German until the Nazis took over Germany, and then he said, "Who said I'm German? I'm Polish."
Somewhat less proud.
Right, because he came from a small village called Mikstadt. And it's such a small, insignificant village that when the Poles took over the Poznan province after World War I, they changed all the names to Polish names. But Mikstadt is still today Mikstadt. It's so insignificant that they didn't even change it. And my father's ancestors came from other places in the Posen province, and my great-great-great-grandfather from the city of Posen, today
right,
Poznan.
so much for genealogy, or what we call in Yiddish mishpachology.
Right.
So both your parents were born in the United States.
Yes.
And you were born in New York. And what kind of home was the home which you grew up?
Both my parents were pretty much non-religious. Why they gave it up, I don't know. We can't ask them anymore. But they moved out to Long Island when I was 9 years old. So from then through high school and college, I was a Long Islander. And I even went to college on Long Island. And for sure, I went to college because it was one way of staying out of the draft. Because during the late 1960s, the United States was heavily involved in the Vietnam War, which was not a popular war. And you tried to avoid the draft by getting a draft deferment. And how could you get a draft deferment? By going to school. That was one way. And that would give you a 2S deferment, a student deferment. After I graduated college in 1969, I took a teaching position in a low socioeconomic area on Long Island. And that gave me an occupational deferment. It was a very strong deferment. But then Uncle Sam was still looking for warm bodies to send over to the jungles in Vietnam in the early 70s. And Uncle Sam instituted the draft lottery, at which time I won the lottery, quote unquote. And so I knew
allow me to guess. Allow me to guess. This is the only time in your life that you won the lottery.
Right. Right. So I knew I was going, and what can you do if Uncle Sam taps you on the shoulder? You could run away. And many of my colleagues, my contemporaries, ran off to Canada or some even to Europe because it was not a popular war. Or you could take a battery of pre-enlistment tests that the US Army allowed you to take, and you could see what you were good at and perhaps get a job that would keep you out of the jungles of Vietnam. And one of the tests was the ALAT test. Many words in the US Army are acronyms, and ALAT stands for Army Language Aptitude Test. And I aced it. And so they were impressed, and they offered me language of my choice. What would you like? Chinese, Laotian, Cambodian, Vietnamese, or Arabic? And the furthest away from Southeast Asia was, of course, Arabic. And after basic training, I was sent out to Dillywick, another acronym.
What year was this?
This was 1971.
Okay. And you were how old at that time?
About 21, 22.
Okay, fine.
47? No, I was
a bit older. You feel you were born
a little
in
bit older
47, you were
than
24. You were 24.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. 23, 24, right?
Okay.
So we were sent to Dillywick, which stands for Defense Language Institute West Coast, DLIWC, Dillywick. And there was a 47-week Arabic course. And during that time, we had a classroom of 10 students. This was a language learning system that was developed by a British linguist. And we in Israel, we pat ourselves on the back that we developed the Ulpan system for learning languages. Wrong. It was actually developed by the United States Army during World War II to teach, an American farm boy or city boy that has no contact with anything Japanese, to teach them Japanese, because America didn't trust the Japanese that they were fighting with. So they developed this system, and the classroom size should never exceed 10
I'm sorry
students.
to interrupt you. When you say they didn't trust the Japanese, you're referring to Japanese Americans?
Right, even Japanese Americans. In fact, Japanese Americans were put into concentration camps.
Right.
People forget this. 10 students was the limit. And in our class, we had 10 students. And among them was one lieutenant colonel who was middle-aged already, probably in his 40s, maybe mid-40s, I would guess. So in the class, there was a Navy guy who was a linguist, and that's why he was learning Arabic. And there was a merchant seaman who was maybe older than most of the rest of us draftees, and a fellow from Colorado. His Arabic name was Mirwan. We all had Arabic names, and we were all taught Arabic culture as well as the language. And it was 47 weeks, 6 hours a day sitting in class, and 2 or 3 hours of homework each night. And so after 47 weeks, you're supposed to have a handle on the language so that when you take your job, you are somewhat capable to increase your efficiency in the language and proficiency in the language by OJT, on the job training. Okay, the reason I mention these fellows in my class is that there was no Air Force guy in our class. And at the time, I mentioned that I grew up in an assimilated home. But during college, I was reading the Bible, and I read the Torah, and it spoke to me, even though I could only read it in English. And I began to try to keep the commandments, including the commandments of kashrut, keeping kosher. Now, here I am, I'm stationed in Dillywick, and I'm trying to keep kosher. And the mess hall, back in those days, and maybe it's still true today, I have no way of knowing, everything was cooked with lard. Even the green beans and string beans and any other kind of vegetable was all cooked with lard. And so I was living on salad and hard-boiled eggs. That's what I was living on, and bread. And I found out that the Air Force guys, because it was a mixed service space, would claim to be Hindus, and they would get separate rats, which meant separate rations. It was an abbreviation for rations. And I went to my headquarters and asked if I could get separate rations. And they told me to get lost. And the lieutenant colonel in our class, who had a mouth that could make a sailor blush, he was not a religious man. He asked what happened, and I told him, and he told me, go back, reapply officially. And I did, and they sent me to the post chaplain, who is a Christian pastor, and he asked me, on what basis are you requesting separate rations? And I said, religious. So he said, give me some more details. So I said, I'm Jewish. I'm trying to keep kosher. He says, on what biblical verse? And I said, Leviticus 11. I knew Leviticus 11. I was so proud of myself. And he opens his Bible, which included the New Testament, and he turns to a quote. And Jesus said, it's more important what comes out of your mouth than what goes into your mouth. And he denied my request. And I go back to class, and the lieutenant colonel...
Excuse me, do you think this denial of this religious exemption or consideration was an example of anti-Semitism?
I would say so.
Okay.
I would say so. I mean, the Air Force guys, they would just claim to be Hindu, that they couldn't eat in the mess hall, and they would immediately get separate rations. So, yeah, I think so. So the colonel heard this, and he saw that they were dumping on the Jew. He was steaming mad, and he left the classroom, and he hoofed it down to headquarters. Inside of about 20 minutes, a runner came from headquarters to our class, and Specialist Brill, you're requested to go to headquarters. They had all the paperwork, the approval, all signed and ready to go. And so I got it thanks to this lieutenant colonel, not thanks to the Christian pastor. So I just mentioned that as kind of the subtitle of my book, A Memoir of Military Anti-Semitism. The fellow, who was another one of the 10 people in the class, 10 students in the class, became a publisher, among other things. And he helped me. We kept our friendship all these decades. He helped me get the book published and up on Amazon. And he gave it the subtitle. And I said, it sounds like a crybaby, a memoir of military anti-Semitism. Why don't you, because of the lieutenant colonel and other people that came to my rescue, I said, why don't you call it a memoir of military anti and pro-Semitism? And he said, Bruce, pro-Semitism doesn't sell books. So that's why.
But the story does indicate that there are, as we will go on to hear from what you will tell us,
right,
based on what I think you're about to tell us, there certainly are many anti-Semites in the United States, in the United States military, in the intelligence community, but there are also lots of good people.
Yeah, lots of good people. I think the majority, maybe the vast majority, are good people.
But it doesn't take more than one or two rotten apples, as we know, to spoil the cart.
The one or two rotten apples in critical places at critical times.
Exactly.
And that's what my book is about.
Right.
And that's the Jew room. And I'll get to that. I'll get to that when I get to bring us up to date to get me into NSA. Okay, I have to tell you that one of the things that I did is recreation was I rode a motorcycle. That was my transportation out in California. And to make a long story short, in a hill climb competition that I had, I wrenched my back, and I was going for a wrenched back treatment every now and then. It becomes critical. That's why I mention this. Okay, so one of the guys in the class, Merwan, was the best student, the very best student. He had a talent for languages. And on one occasion, when he was trying to learn Spanish and to immerse himself in the Spanish language, he took a trip to Mexico. This is before his enlistment in the army, or before he was drafted, actually. No, he enlisted. You had to enlist in order to get the language training. Everyone was enlisted. Would have been drafted. He ran out of money, and he heard about a program in Cuba where you go to language school for Spanish language half a day, and you work on a commune half a day. So he went into the Cuban embassy in Mexico City to get some literature on this program. And he never went, and he went back home. Okay. During his BI, another acronym, background investigation, before getting your security clearance, you have a BI. He was asked if he ever had any contact with a communist official. And he knew he walked into the Cuban embassy in Mexico City, but walked right out again and never went to Cuba. And so he thought it would be less problematic if he answered no. They caught him in a lie, and he never got his security clearance because of that. They're so careful, and they're so knowledgeable. How did they know?
How did they know?
I don't know, but they knew.
But obviously they have all these places under surveillance.
I guess so. And I think it's probably a good idea. The more you know, the less you regret. I think it's a good idea. Anyway, he didn't get his security clearance. I mention this just to show how meticulous the U.S. intelligence agencies are with security. Okay, so we who got our security clearance, we were sent to Goodfellow Air Force Base, where we got security training. And then after that, we were stationed in our permanent duty station. Some of us were sent overseas. This fellow who became a publisher was sent to Germany. 3 of us were sent to NSA, National Security Agency, in Fort Meade, Maryland. And that's where I worked as a Middle East intelligence analyst / Arabic interpreter.
Give us perhaps a little bit of background about the NSA. What is it exactly? When was it established? What does it do?
Okay, to get the real details, you have to read my book. I give them all here.
Okay.
I didn't study them well enough to give a detailed account of when exactly NSA, but soon after World War II, NSA was established.
In other words, around the same time that the CIA was established. Which was in
Maybe, I don't know that.
I believe, or 48, and I think 47.
Okay, so NSA might have come a little bit after that, but I'm not a historian on that point, but I do include that in my book, and it's all there. But one thing that I can say is that NSA is much, much bigger than the CIA. However, NSA kept a very low profile. Everyone had heard of the CIA, but very few people in the 1970s ever heard of NSA. They kept such a low profile. In fact, we used to joke that NSA stood for no such agency. In fact, we were warned not to divulge that we worked at NSA and what we did. That was forbidden. You could say that you were an Arabic linguist in the U.S. Army, but you couldn't say that you were an Arabic linguist and worked at NSA. Things like that. They tried to keep a very low profile, and they succeeded quite well. Now, I was there, and I think in retrospect, in 2020 hindsight, I think that the Jew boy was given a very non-essential job. And I can't tell you exactly what it is because I haven't gotten approval to divulge what exactly I did. But I'm telling you, it was not critical and it was not intriguing. And it required no more than a half hour a day to do. And so for the rest of the 8.5 hours that I was there, I had to look busy. And one of the things I did to fill in time was to read all kinds of material on the Middle East and to begin learning Hebrew. And this became critical at a critical time because on October 4th, a couple days before the Yom Kippur War began on October 6th, I went for a treatment on my neck.
We're talking about October 1973.
1973. I went for a treatment on my neck. And I arranged it because that was the Yom Kippur weekend. Yom Kippur was October 6th. It fell on a Saturday. So here, I went to the medical clinic to get this treatment that I was getting every several weeks. And I arranged the treatment for a 2 o'clock appointment so that by 2:30, I could get out to my car and begin the 4.5 hour drive home from Fort Meade, Maryland, to my parents' home on Long Island. In order to beat the traffic, the rush hour traffic in the Baltimore tunnel. I thought that was really smart. And I got the approval of my immediate supervisor to do this. And every time I got the treatment, I was laid out on a cot, face down, and a salt pack, a warm salt pack was put on my neck. And invariably, I would fall asleep. It was just the most relaxing thing you can imagine. The nurse comes over and wakes me up. Specialist Brill, you have a phone call at the desk. So I go over and pick up the black receiver. The color is important. And my immediate supervisor is on the other end. And he says, you're planning to go home after your treatment, right? I said, yeah, I cleared it with you. He said, don't even think about going home. We have a war on our hands for real this time. And the hits the fan on Saturday.
This was on the Thursday.
This is on a black phone while I was still in NSA.
But this is on the Thursday before the war broke out. The war broke out on Shabbat on Saturday. This is 2 days prior.
Right. So
what is the significance of the black phone?
Okay, it's important, the color of the phone, because on black phones, you're not allowed to release any classified information.
In other words, a regular phone line.
It's a regular phone line. And my supervisor, who is a Jew hater, which is another story, he says that the blank hits the fan on Saturday. And I said, and I mentioned his name, which I can't mention now because they deleted it from my book. I can mention his first name, Mike. Mike, we've had several of these alerts over the past months. We had a serious one in January, February. We had one in May. And now, how can you be sure that this is not another false alarm? He said, this time it's AVAL. And AVAL meant no doubt.
AVAL stands for something?
Good question. I don't know. It just meant, maybe there was BVAL and CVAL. I don't know. I just know that AVAL meant that it was for sure that the Arabs were going to attack on Saturday. He didn't tell me exactly when, but he did tell me Saturday. And my assumption is that he knew before. And my assumption was correct because other people, my colleagues, 4 other NSA workers that are my corroboration in my book, 4 others knew before I did. So that's why I think they were keeping the Jew in the dark. So certainly they knew before. And that was my assumption. I mean, he had to have known before me because he informed me. On the first day of the war, because I could gist both Arabic and Hebrew, I was given a special job to monitor live communication from the battlefront. And that's this picture on the Hebrew version. That's as if it's me. It's actually my son wearing my army uniform. And I'm looking down from the heavens on what's going on the battlefront. That's basically tells the story of the first day of the war. and I'm monitoring live communication and recording anything that has any military content. That was my job. And I can say that. I can't tell you this aspect of it. I pick up a Israeli soldier who's stationed on the Bar-Lev line. The Bar-Lev line was a string of fortifications on the east bank of the Suez Canal. And this soldier calls his mother on the outskirts of Jerusalem, and I'm listening to their conversation. I'm on the other side of the planet.
You should just explain so that everyone understands that the NSA, its first and foremost field of activity is electronic communications interception.
Right. Right.
So that's the first, its first and major task is to be able to listen into any and all communications around the globe, in fact.
Right. Right.
Anything you confirm, and you confirm that this they did in fact have this capability.
For sure.
In spades.
For sure.
In
fact, if you look closely at the emblem on the sleeve of my Army uniform, you can see it's a hawk grabbing electronic communication out of the sky.
All right. So you were tasked with. So this is on the Shabbat, on the Saturday. Of Yom Kippur.
Oh yeah. I worked on Yom Kippur.
On October the 6th, 1973, the first day of the Yom Kippur War, you were tasked with intercepting communications from the battlefield.
Yes.
And what did you hear?
Okay. So among other things, because I was picking up Arabic and Hebrew, I pick up this Israeli soldier who calls to his mother. And they had no idea that someone is listening to their phone conversation. And this is back in ancient times, 50 years ago, 1973. We were doing it way back then. Imagine what they're capable of doing today. I assume that they're monitoring our communication here. I assume that.
I don't assume, I'm certain.
Right. And rightly so. They should be. And maybe they're waiting for me to make a mistake and disclose something I shouldn't be disclosing. And so I'm very careful. Anyway, they told me not to. And so I'm a Yeled Tov Washington. I'm a good American boy.
So what did you hear in this conversation?
Okay, so I can't tell you the details of the conversation, but what I can tell you is that because I knew a couple days in advance that this was going to happen, proof positive, I was surprised that they were surprised. How could they not know? They're our allies.
In other words, from this conversation, it was obvious to you that the soldiers on the Bar-Lev line, the defensive line in the Sinai desert, right up against the Suez Canal, it was clear to you that the Israeli forces there were taken by surprise.
Yes. And Rabbi Duped, at that moment, I looked down at my Army uniform and I said, oh my God, I'm wearing the wrong uniform. I actually said that to myself. And at that moment, I became an instant Zionist. And I promised myself that I would come to Israel. That was a defining moment.
Had you been a Zionist up to that moment?
Not really. I mean, I even, was working on Yom Kippur. But I did fast on Yom Kippur. you know, in the years prior to that. I was trying to become more practicing. So anyway, this bothered me. It bothered me for years, for decades. It bothered me.
In other words, it bothered you that you knew for certain that the United States intelligence community, or parts thereof, were fully aware of this fact that the war would break out on Yom Kippur, and it seems that the Israelis were not informed.
Right. And so that terribly bothered me. But I didn't know what to do about it. What can I do about it? My assumption, I gave the benefit of the doubt to the Americans that somehow the intelligence that we had that was a vow, somehow we didn't get it to the Israelis in time. That was my assumption.
It was just some kind of a foul up.
Yeah, that was my assumption. I didn't see in it any deceit. However, in the early 1990s, actually maybe even in the late 1980s, Jonathan Pollard was caught in 1985 and brought to trial and given a life sentence for violating his secrecy oath and passing intelligence to a foreign entity. And I didn't give much thought to that, except there was a demonstration one day outside the American consulate in Jerusalem, and I went to listen to the speakers at the demonstration, because at the time, I wasn't a Pollard advocate because he violated his secrecy oath. How could he do something like that? In listening to the different speakers, Geula Cohen said, "You can't trust the Americans." And after she got off the stage, I spoke with her and I told her briefly my story, that we in American intelligence knew that the Arabs were going to attack on October 6th, and somehow we didn't get the intelligence to the Israelis in time. In time. She said, "Would you go up and take the microphone?" I said, "Okay." I did, and I told my story, and it was of interest to the media people in Israel. And I was asked to be interviewed on television, and I was interviewed for newspapers, that America knew in advance. How could that be? America knew in advance, and Israel didn't know and was caught by surprise with her pants down.
In what year was this?
This was in the early 90s, I would say. Right. And so my story got some press, and Carol Pollard, Jonathan's sister, contacted me and gave me reams of information on the Pollard case. And then all of a sudden, I became educated, and I didn't think of him disparagingly anymore. In fact, the opposite. I became an active advocate on his behalf. And I was ignited to learn more about the Yom Kippur War. And what I stumbled upon at the National Library at Hebrew University in Givat Ram was an article from the New York Times on the 12th of September, 1975. Now, I stumbled upon this in the 1990s, and what I read was, to me, a horrible wake-up that something dirty was going on. Because what did it say? It said that, among other things, the United States intelligence community failed in the Yom Kippur War to predict the Yom Kippur War. And a Dr. Ray Klein, not Jewish, in spite of his name, testified before the Congressional Investigation Committee of Otis Pike, a congressman from Long Island, that all of the American intelligence agencies were fooled. They had no idea that the Arabs were going to attack. I said, what?
This is what Klein said.
Yeah, this is what Klein testified under oath. So help him God, that American intelligence didn't know, had no idea. This put a fire under my proverbial tochus, and I began probing more and more. And one of the things that I decided I needed to clarify was 6 years ago to pick up a phone and call General Eli Ze'ira, because he at that time was almost 90 years old. Today, he's around 96. And I didn't know how much longer he'd be for the world. And I picked up the phone and told him that I worked for U.S. intelligence, and I have a story that might be interesting for him to hear. At the same time, I was interested in hearing from him what he knew and what he didn't know, and most critically, he had said that he got, and so did Golda Meir and Moshe Dayan, said that they got intelligence assessments from foreign friends that the Arabs were not going to attack. And my question to him was that those foreign friends, would they be Americans? And Eli Ze'ira closed his mouth, closed his eyes, and answered me by nodding his head in that manner. He was in pain.
When did this meeting take place again?
6 years ago, July 4th. July 4th. I will never forget the day.
2018 or 17?
It would have been.
I know it's in the book. It doesn't, it's okay.
It's in the book.
It's in the book. So either 17 or 18. Okay.
Right, but it was July 4th. I remember it was July 4th.
This is a meeting with General Eli Ze'ira, who was in 1973 the head of Israel's military intelligence.
Correct.
And he famously told his superiors that the probability of hostilities, of the outbreak of hostilities, was very low.
Very low.
Very low.
Very low.
And here he's admitting to you that he was informed by American associates and contacts in the American intelligence community.
Right.
So he was informed by these people of the exact opposite, that they would not be attacking.
Right. So I asked him, I said, apparently they duped you. And he said, no, they were friends of Israel and they were faithful people or person. He didn't disclose who it was that he was in contact with. You could ask him. Someone could ask him. But he did say that they were loyal friends of Israel and would not have duped him. So I said, they were duped. And the question is,
in
how
other
could
words,
they have been duped?
those American officials or intelligence officers or military personnel with whom he was in contact, they themselves were duped.
Right. Now, how could this happen? Okay. I told you that I was able to gist Hebrew by October 6th, 1973. At the same time, I was still working under my Arabic supervisor as an Arabic linguist. And he wrote me a very, very bad eval that was unjustified.
Evaluation.
Right, an evaluation, an enlisted man's evaluation. And it was totally unjustified. But he was a Jew hater, so he could Jew this way. And other people in middle management, there was one black fellow, Dusty. I can mention his nickname. Everyone called him Dusty. Dusty saw, and he was pained by this, that I was being dumped on because I was maybe the only Jew in uniform in all of G6. That's what I'm thinking in retrospect.
G6 was the department in which you worked in the NSA.
Right. G6 is the department that deals with the Middle East. And I think I might have been the only Jew in uniform in the entire department, including the Hebrew department. In the Hebrew department, there were two Jews. One was the assistant supervisor who had converted to Judaism while he was in the Navy, but now he was a civilian, and an Orthodox Jewish girl from Baltimore who worked at NSA, spying on Israel. I mean, we say spying on Israel, but it was just collecting intelligence. It's something that friends do to friends. You collect intelligence. It's nothing necessarily nasty, but the nastiness was that
it's nothing personal. It's just business.
Business, yeah. It's nothing nasty. It doesn't hurt Israel to collect intelligence on Israel. It's okay. I'm sure Israel collects intelligence on America if it's not done in a way that's illegal, because there's legal spying and illegal spying, and the NSA claims that they don't do anything illegal like the CIA might. In fact, the motto at NSA is "In God we trust, all others we monitor." And so I think I might have been the only Jew in uniform in all of G6, I think, at that time. So Dusty saw that the Jew was being dumped on unjustifiably. And there was another middle management person, an E7, a top sergeant in the Air Force. And I can't mention his name, although I want to celebrate this hero. He came to me and he said, "I realize that you've been dumped on, and my rank as an E7, that's a status in the civil service or in the military, my rank, I outrank your supervisor. So I can write an eval, an evaluation report, that will replace and supersede his." And that's what he did. And I want to celebrate this man. I want to mention his name in my book. But the Pentagon said, you're not allowed to. And it's my biggest regret about the Pentagon review is that I can't celebrate this hero. He's a lovely man. And I think he was an official in his church. So he's a good Christian and a good man. And I can't celebrate him. I'm sorry.
Okay. So be it.
So the middle management also saw that it wasn't healthy for me to be working under this Jew hater. And they arranged for me to be transferred to the Hebrew section. And, because it's not nice to spy, again, quote unquote, on your friends, back in the 60s, Hebrew linguists were told to say that they were special Arabic linguists rather than saying Hebrew. But already in the 70s, that became a joke. So here I was transferred now to the Hebrew section, and it was a closed section. You needed to know a key to get into the door. And in that section, the supervisor was my roommate. Because when I began learning Hebrew by myself, I heard that this Hebrew supervisor was looking for a roommate. And I thought, wow, that'd be great for my Hebrew, to have a roommate that's the best Hebrew linguist around. And so he became not only my roommate and my supervisor, but a friend. He became a close friend. How close? In 1976, when I got married, and we got married in Brooklyn, in Borough Park, he, and his nickname was Uncle Leo, so I can say Uncle Leo, but I can't mention his name, drove the full 4 hours plus from Maryland to Borough Park, Brooklyn, to hold one corner of my chuppah to be at my wedding. And not only that, after we got married, we moved in with Uncle Leo. He now had a home, and he rented out rooms in his home to single military servicemen that worked at NSA. And he jokingly called it Uncle Leo's home for unwed fathers. And so we moved in with Uncle Leo at his home for unwed fathers and spent there several months, maybe close to a year, until my wife was giving birth to our first child. And then we got our own place. But let's go back now to Israel, where it bothered me so much. It bothered me that this Dr. Roy Klein testified before Congress, lied. He lied before Congress. Okay, so now things became clear. I heard from...
How did he lie? What did he say?
He said that all the agencies were fooled. Nobody knew that the Arabs were going to attack Israel on Yom Kippur.
Whereas you knew for a fact that this was not the case.
Yeah, for sure. So I wrote this up after I met with Eli Zaira, and he confided in me that he got this false intelligence assessment from his American colleagues. I wrote it up and I took it to Haaretz newspaper, and the editor read it and said, "This is explosive. Did you record him?" And I said, "No." He said, "Did you have a witness with you?" I said, "No." He said, no one will believe you." And then people told me, "Bruce, you have to write a book." And that's what I did. Took me, close to 4 years. From about 2019, I wrote the book, and there were some problems in getting it published, but never mind that. I wrote the book and got it approved twice by the Pentagon, as I mentioned. And so the other two aspects, because nobody would believe that Eliezer Ira confided in me that he received this intelligence assessment from the Americans that the Arabs were not going to attack. When I discovered, after getting the approval from the Pentagon to publish the book, that Moshe Dayan's protocol from October 7th confirmed Eliezer Ira's admission that he got this intelligence assessment from the Americans that the Arabs were not going to attack. That and two other things. One is that I was put in touch with Shmulik Pfefferman, who worked, as I did, during and before the Yom Kippur War. He was monitoring Syrian military communication. And he fell upon 3 indications that were proof positive that the Syrians were going to attack the following day. And he passed this urgently to headquarters. That was one thing that I wanted to include in my book, because Eliezer Ira poo-pooed his own intelligence assessments, his own intelligence points, and instead relied on the American intelligence assessments. That was false. And the third thing was a man that I met, and I'll try and make this brief. I meant by the finger of God because it was too coincidental to be coincidental. A man who was working for NSA out in the field, and he was stationed in Germany during 1973. And he said in February there were false alarms, in May there were false alarms. In October, however, his unit was repositioned from their base in Germany to a base in Italy to get ready for the war that was going to come in early October. And he asked his supervisor, are we passing this vital intelligence to our Israeli allies? And his supervisor told him, not your job to ask. Indicating
what month was this in 1973?
This was October already, in October. And during the war, he asked his supervisor the same question, and he got the same answer. So he knew that the intelligence that they were collecting in Italy from the battlefront was being passed to us in headquarters in Fort Meade, but was not being passed to our Israeli friends. This troubled him so much that after he got out of the army and he went back to his home in Texas, and he's not Jewish, he converted to Judaism. He made Aliyah to Israel. He renounced his American citizenship. And he's now a neighbor of yours living in Efrat. And I wanted to include his story in my book as well. So his story and the protocol of Moshe Dayan and Shmulik Pfefferman's testimony that they knew, and it was ignored because Eliezer Ira, the bottleneck, relied on American assessments, false assessments, purposely false assessments. How did it become purposeful? Because at one social event of the Hebrew department, the supervisor, my roommate, Uncle Leo, got drunk. And he confided in me that there are rooms in NSA that are off limits to me because I'm a Jew. As the liquor went in, the truth came out. And apparently, his conscience was bothering him about this. I learned subsequently that the Jew room continued to exist past 1973. Why do I call it the Jew room? Because I learned of this from John Loftus, who wrote a book, The Secret War Against the Jews, in which he interviewed members of the Jew room. And he says it's a total misnomer because, number one, Jews are not allowed not only to enter these rooms, but to even know that they exist. And number two, that it's not one room, it's rooms. And I knew that from my drunk supervisor and friend. So I knew this. And that's how the intelligence, when it reached Eli Zaira's American colleagues who were trustworthy Israel lovers, were duped themselves. Lots of small pieces of a complex puzzle, and it took 50 years to figure it all out.
This information is indeed volatile, and also very illuminating, because it's only a few months ago that I saw an interview with a person who, on an Israeli media channel, not non-mainstream but truth-oriented news channel and media channel called Tov, T-O-V, Tov, Arutz Tov, and they interviewed a person who was presented as a former Mossad agent, and his claim was that he had no doubt that Moshe Dayan was an American asset, and that he deliberately misled Israel, which of course is a terribly shocking claim, that the Minister of Defense, Israel's Minister of Defense at the time of the Yom Kippur War, was in fact working in cahoots with American intelligence in order to deceive Israel. Now, this person didn't explain exactly why he said this or why he knew this to be the case, but he said, I know of certain things that Moshe Dayan said and did at that time, which I can only explain by assuming that he was working for the Americans. Apparently, what he's referring to is the document that you mentioned, that in which Moshe Dayan states explicitly that 12 hours before the attack began, he was informed by American officials, people with whom he was in touch in the American administration or military, that there would not be an attack. And he passed this information on to the Prime Minister Golda Meir, and one assumes also to the Chief of Staff, Dado Elazar. What you have revealed to us today, Bruce, is that this former Mossad agent was wrong. It's not that Moshe Dayan, and I'm not here to defend Moshe Dayan, there are many things about the man that are despicable and reprehensible, but I do not think it would be correct or fair to say about him that he was a traitor to his people, or that he wished to cause the downfall of Israel or anything like that. It's not the case that he was deliberately misleading his own country, but rather that he himself was misled by certain groups or individuals within the American intelligence community, and he passed on that information. And that's what you're really that's what you're telling us, and this explains the facts that this Mossad agent referred to, and sheds a different light on them.
David, you're still sitting down. I want to read to you on the back of my book a review from John Loftus, and there's nobody that knows more about U.S. intelligence deceiving Israel than John Loftus. He wrote, Bruce Brill is Henry Kissinger's...
I'm sorry, perhaps you should just tell everyone who John Loftus is for those who do not know, and what was his job, what was his position for him to know such things.
Okay, John Loftus was an officer in the advocacy wing of the American Army, and he wrote the book, The Secret War Against the Jews, documenting a long history of how American intelligence worked against Jews. And he's the one who interviewed people who were part of the Jew room in NSA.
And it should be pointed out that John Loftus is not Jewish.
He's not Jewish, right? In his own words, his face is the map of Ireland. And I visited him about a month ago in St. Petersburg,
in other
Florida.
words, he's from Irish Catholic extraction.
Right. And he was the head of the Florida Holocaust Museum in St. Petersburg. So anyway, getting back to what he wrote, something that's inexplicable, and it baffled me for a while. Bruce Brill is Henry Kissinger's worst nightmare, an honest man inside the NSA. And he goes on. And I often wondered, why did he say that? I hardly mention Henry Kissinger. But you're a rabbi, you believe in God. And so do I. This book, not my book, this book called HaKesher HaMeruba, the quadrilateral connection.
The four-pointed connection.
Right, something like that. In which he discloses, the author, that Kissinger arranged for an orchestrated war in 1973 to give the Arabs a theatrical victory so that a peace process could begin. And of course, he got Sadat and Assad as part of this routine.
Plot.
He got the Soviets.
Brezhnev.
And he got Golda Meir and Moshe Dayan to be accomplices to granting Syria and Egypt a victory. And that's his book.
In other words, according to this book, and the name of the book again in Hebrew is HaKesher HaMeruba, the four-way connection.
Right.
And the name of the author of that book is?
The name of the author is Doron Hakimi.
Doron Hakimi. And this book is, I believe, unavailable.
No, it's not available anywhere. It's not available anywhere.
When and where was it published?
In 1978, he tried to publish it. He did. He printed out copies. He took them to bookstores. He had to remove them from all the bookstores and agree not to disseminate his book because his life was threatened in 1978.
By whom?
He won't disclose, but I don't think it's the official government, because this book fell into my hand by, again, finger of God, because it was totally suppressed, totally. He kept his mouth shut for 45 years. It's a bit of a story. I called a lady, and a guy answers the phone. He says he found the phone in Jerusalem. And I go to pick up her phone for her.
I'm sorry,
he's a young man.
I'm missing something. You found something lost in the street?
No. I called a lady and a guy answers her phone.
Oh, I see.
And he said he found the phone in
He found the phone in the
Jerusalem.
street.
And I go to pick up the phone for her. And he's a young man, maybe about 40. And so he's born after the Yom Kippur War. And I'm curious, it was about the time that I'm finishing writing my manuscript. I said, would you, as an Israeli young man born after the Yom Kippur War, would you buy a book that discloses the truth behind the Yom Kippur War surprise? And he answers, no. I said, well, why that kind of answer? He says, because my father wrote a book and it was suppressed. His life was threatened. He had to suppress it. And the only people he shares it with is his immediate family. So no, I'm not interested.
This man was the son of Doron Hakimi.
Yes. And so he takes me to his
That's entirely,
apartment.
as you say, the hand of God.
He takes me to his
You
apartment.
did not know this person, neither the son nor the father?
Not at all. Not at all. But I know them now, and I know the family, and I know the author. He's 82 years old today, and he's a lovely man, an honest man, and I'm trying to get him to disclose who his sources are, because what he says is that Kissinger orchestrated the Yom Kippur War with the compliance of Golda Meir and Moshe Dayan. It's unbelievable.
In other words, that book is claiming that which that ex-Mossad agent that I heard interviewed was claiming, that Moshe Dayan was working for and with the Americans.
Yeah.
But your information suggests that they were duped by U.S. intelligence or parts of the intelligence community, and that Henry Kissinger, you're suggesting, was behind all of this.
Well, according to Doron Hakimi.
What position did Doron Hakimi hold? How could he have known any of these things?
He had sources, and he said that he promised his sources that he would never disclose who they were. And I said, they're probably dead by now, because if they were officials in the government that sat in on many of these meetings between Kissinger and all these political players at the time, they're probably, if they're still alive, they're in an old age home someplace horizontal. But he said, I gave my word and I won't disclose. I took his book to the censura, to the Israeli censor. And the only thing after their 2-month review, the only thing that they required that I take out, because I'm going to publish his book, and it's this close to being published.
Both in Hebrew?
Both in Hebrew. He wrote it in Hebrew. Both in Hebrew and in English. And in English. And the title that I'm giving it in English is Kissinger's Connections.
And what was the information that you were required to remove, to delete from the book?
Okay. I don't know if I'm allowed to say, but it's maybe I can say it in a vague way.
Don't do so. If you're not allowed to, don't.
I don't know.
Okay.
I think it's a universally known secret, or I could maybe hint at it this way. Israel is believed by some sources to have nuclear capability.
Okay.
And any reference to that in this book would have been required to be redacted.
I see. All right.
Let's
understood.
Put it that way.
Understood. Very well. Can you expand on on Kissinger's role in this deception and what his aims were?
Yeah, sure. Sadat and Assad were on record, very clear record, in the early 1970s of saying what was taken by force of arms will be returned by force of arms, the occupied territories. And they said it repeatedly, again and again and again, that they would not accept the return of any of the occupied territories as a gift from the Israelis.
What they refer to as occupied territories, what I would refer to, and probably you also would refer to as liberated territories.
Well, I'm speaking for the Arabs. They would never call it.
I understand. I just want to make it clear to anyone listening that
where we're
do not hold that position.
Right.
It is also my
Certainly
position for
not.
the record. It's also my position for the record, as it is the position of many experts in international law, that it is entirely spurious to claim that these are occupied territories.
Certainly, any territory that's taken in a defensive war, the defensive victor has authority over. It's clear.
It's actually a much broader topic than that. We won't go into perhaps on another occasion.
Right.
There's an entire book on the subject, which was written many years ago by a gentleman that I knew vaguely, met on two occasions perhaps. His name was Grief or Greif. He was a lawyer. I can't remember his first name. Howard Grief, I think was.
Oh yeah, I knew him personally.
You knew him, okay. So I also met him many years ago. This goes back. This goes back to the very late 80s or around 1990, around the year Tafshin Nun, according to our calendar. I met him through a shared acquaintance, and he was an expert in international law and other related fields, and he wrote an entire book on the subject. I don't remember the name of the book, but I think it's available on Amazon and elsewhere, in which he demonstrated that all talk about occupied territories and illegal settlements, all the rest of it, are entirely spurious and without any legal case, bereft of any convincing legal basis. But as I said, so that's a topic, a discussion for another time. So let us return to Kissinger.
Right. So it may seem at first glance that that what he claims in this book might take the wind out of the sails of my disclosures, but I don't think so. I think it fits like a hand in glove. And it explains the inexplicable that John Loftus called me Henry Kissinger's worst nightmare, because I hardly mention Henry Kissinger in my book. I only spoke about firsthand experience or things that I was able to glean from public resources.
All right. So what can you tell us about Henry Kissinger's machinations and his intentions? What was he trying to achieve?
I think what you
as you understand it.
I think what you need to do is interview. It'll have, and I think it can be in English as well, because he speaks English.
I'm happy to interview anyone in Hebrew as well, but go on.
Doron Hakimi. He's not up to it.
And you think he would be willing to go on record?
I hope so. I'm going to visit him later this week, and
all right, we'll discuss that.
I'll twist his arm, not too hard.
Well, this is a very interesting point that we have reached in this discussion, and I think that for today our time is at an end, but I don't think this will be the last time that we shall speak together in such a format and allow our conversation to be heard by others. There's much more to be said, I'm sure, but at this point, let us end here for today. And I want to thank you very much for your time and for the information, which I'm convinced will amaze and probably surprise many people. But on the other hand, it also explains many things that have been as you say, inexplicable for 50 years. And in fact, we're only touching this is only the tip of the iceberg. We're only scratching the surface when it comes to the evil intentions of many powerful people around the world, and specifically in the American intelligence community, to harm and if not to destroy the Jewish people.
If there were a way to have any of these cells in the American intelligence community that work against stated American policy, they should be somehow monitored. It's very difficult because you're talking about even cleaning staff that sets foot into the National Security Agency have to be cleared and have top secret clearance, cleaning staff. And so above top secret, there's all kinds of additional restrictions. And so it's so difficult to monitor what goes on inside closed rooms, the inner sancta of the American intelligence community. And it's something that's totally un-American, that these groups are secret, unmonitorable, and taxpayer funded. Totally un-American.
And I think it's generally known and recognized that many other people in positions of power in the United States, one obvious and clear example would be President Richard Nixon. I think it's well known in many sources. I think you mention it in your book, and others have written about this, that he was, when he became aware of some of these deceptions, he was very angry and very upset. And when Kissinger and others dragged their feet when it came to resupplying Israel with armaments in the Yom Kippur War, he put his foot down and made sure that it happened. But it was not something that all elements in the American administration, and more particularly the deep state, went along with. They were actively trying to cause Israel's downfall, or at least bring about a limited defeat. You would agree with that assessment?
Right, and you to say it another way, it's not clear that Richard Nixon, the President of the United States, knew of the existence and the machinations of the Jew room.
It's quite likely that he did not know anything at all about these things.
How could he know, even though he's the President of the United States? So again,
one of the most important aspects of modern history, when I say modern history, I mean, shall we say, the last 100 years, is the immense power and reach of the deep state in various countries, not just in the United States, but most certainly in the United States. This is also true in Israel, it's true in the UK, it's true in Europe. The control and power and reach of unelected officials and of bureaucrats and various officials who in essence are more powerful than the elected, democratically elected officials. And this makes a difference if you believe in democracy. I'm not saying that I do, but if you believe in that, then this should be upsetting to you. This is one of the essential points that many people do not fully understand, but need to understand. Again, let us end on this note for today, and we will pick it up with Hashem's help on some other time in the near future. Thank you, Bruce, and all the best to you for now.
Thank you.
Shalom u'nisahon, peace and victory.
Amen.